And so I'm inviting them back to come and talk to us about the relationship between emotional sobriety and the 12 steps. This is part 2 of their discussion, and it'll bring you up to speed. And I think you'll sit back, relax. I think you'll enjoy every single thing they have to say, because they change lives every time they speak. And so, Alan and Herb, I don't see you yet, Herb, but I know you'll be here. But Alan, take it away.
I'm very much here.
Oh, you are. Hi.
Hello.
Then you guys can take it away. Look at that. I've got both of you in my screen. What's better in this world?
That's right.
We're spending a lot of time together, Alan.
We are. It's wonderful. Been wonderful.
For people's purposes, we've been together since Thursday of last week. And so we have some continuity going for our 5th day today. So it's wonderful.
Yeah, we just came back from St. Louis, and we spent Friday speaking to the Sauna Lake, which is a treatment center out there in St. Louis. We talked to their staff on Friday, introducing them to emotional sobriety. And then on Saturday and Sunday, we had a 2-day workshop, Herb, which was just phenomenal. Really was quite, the participants were quite engaged and got a lot out of it.
As we did, and Susie, you mentioned that you get a lot out of when we speak. Alan and I are very clear that we get a lot out of when we speak and when you all speak too. It's a back and forth learning dynamic, actually.
So we're with you today to continue our introduction into what we're going to be doing is going through the 12 steps and really focusing on how the 12 steps help us find and achieve emotional sobriety in our life. So if you were not here last month when we talked, please go back and listen to that presentation. Patrick and the group have done a great job at archiving these talks, as well as all of the other presentations Herb and I and many other great presenters have given. So you have a wonderful resource out there. And I'm sure as I'm saying that, what will appear in the chat magically will be the link to all of those archives. So we're not going to spend a lot of time going over what we talked about last time. But it really was a warm-up to discussing what we're going to start today is an overview of the 12 steps. And then next month, Herb will start us off on step 1. I will be present the month after that to continue to talk about step 1 from more of a psychological perspective. And then the 3rd month, we will be together to talk about step 1 together with you, and that will be more of a time to answer your questions and interact, although we will give a brief presentation at the beginning of the hour and a half with you, but no more than 30 minutes because we want the majority of the time spent with our interaction. So that's how the process is going. And Patrick, is if I described it as you understand it? Where did Patrick go?
Well, I see him there.
Oh, well, sorry, Alan. Yes. Yeah, I was just answering questions in the chat. Yes, you've described it perfectly. Thank you, Alan. Thank you, Herb.
So let me go ahead and share my screen with you, because we'll kind of use some of these slides as kind of a starting point in our discussion today, and then there will be some room for you afterwards. So as I said to you, this is going to be our continuation of the introduction to an overview of the 12 steps and how they help us find emotional sobriety. So do you want to say something in general about the steps, Herb, in terms of
Sure,
how you've experienced them and how you look at them at this point in your recovery?
Sure. And I think I want to stress what you've indicated also, that it's an overview, that we're standing really on the top of the mountain looking out at the large perspective of the 12 steps and the large perspective of emotional sobriety, and making some comments about the connection. And as you indicated, I'll do a little bit of a deep dive in each step. From a 12-step standpoint, from the big book standpoint, you'll do a deep dive in terms of the psychological implications of emotional sobriety as connected to the steps. And then we'll connect the third visit in terms of our mutual understanding and experience, and then dialogue off of that. So it should be a good experience. Now, it'll be a better experience for each of you if you do a little bit of work in between, quite frankly. The thought has just come to me that, especially with regard to the steps, from my standpoint, I will give some indication each step as to what might be helpful for the next assignment, for the next step, for you to at least review some material out of the big book in 12 and 12 probably. And Dr. Berger may do the same with regard to his emotional sobriety book, that you could, we're not saying don't go to school and all the class. No. It's just up to you to maybe prepare a little bit, because as you know, you come to get a drink of water from Dr. Berger and Herb Kaighan, and you get a fire hose. Because we're pretty intense and we're pretty dense in terms of the material we have, because we've been doing it a while, and we're just saturated with it, and we're passionate about sharing it. So the 12 steps is a process for awakening. Originally created because of an addiction, alcohol, broadened to be for all addictions. That's the gift of the 12-step program. But let's not lose sight of what the purpose is. It's not about the addiction. It's about unmanageability. It's about awakening. And spiritual sobriety is literally about living awake, because you've awakened through the steps 1 through 9, the program of recovery. And now you're living awake, or attempting to, on a daily basis, to stay awake, because we have a tendency to fall asleep, and we don't know that we don't know, and we're falling asleep. And the steps 10, 11, and 12 are the tools for us on a daily basis to continue to be awake and to foster improving and expanding that awakenedness.
Yeah, that's a wonderful description, Herb, in terms of the process that's going on. My overview of the steps is that they follow the same arc that good therapy would follow.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what I mean by that is that they begin by challenging you and your set of beliefs and your set of attitudes. See, self-acceptance is a prerequisite for change. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. That's why in the first step, it's so important to admit, right? I'm accepting something about myself. That acceptance creates a paradoxical theory of change, as we're going to see. So the beginning of good therapy is about helping people accept, but it's not just a cognitive thing or an intellectual exercise. Good therapy will also integrate now taking appropriate action in your life and integrating these insights into changing your behavior. And so the program, it's amazing to me, it's experiential therapy. That's what we're going through by going through the 12 steps. Just like in good experiential therapy, you'll become aware of what you're doing, then you'll try some things on, you'll see what those mean to you, you'll process that information, you'll continue to grow through the whole experience of it, and you'll grow into what you can be. Same thing that happens in the program. The important thing for us is what we can be is we can achieve a state of emotional autonomy. And that's the same thing good therapy is trying to help you achieve, is through self-awareness and expanding your consciousness, you achieve a sense of freedom in your life. I like to call it the untethered self. We hear a lot about the untethered soul, right? But I'd like to keep it more psychological for me. And this is about becoming an untethered self. And there are many things that tether us in life. And Bill Wilson and Dr. Bob have discovered an incredible formula that, if applied and if you work it, has an incredible impact on your life.
Think that term freedom, that's the central bullseye term for the purpose of the process. To be awake, conscious, is to be free. Freedom from, in step one, and this is a preview for what we're going to be doing, freedom from the addiction that's guaranteed by the end of step 9. Check it out on page 84. And freedom from unmanageability. Bill says very clearly, lack of power is our dilemma. This is a process of empowerment. Dr. Berger just taught the untethered self, meaning I've become fully empowered. And I'm going to say something that may be a little confrontational, and that is, we are given, that's the promise, we are given the power to manage our lives. We are given the power to manage our lives. God does not manage my life. I've begun saying that now in a very crisp and confrontive way, because I hear so much in the rooms about God managing my life. Sorry, that's not my take on it. I manage my life, and I have the power to do that because I'm in connection to and contact with the power, and I'm awake to it in relationship.
Well, that's so important, right? Talk about the GPS. I love how you use that analogy in this context.
Well, you hear some people say, let God drive your car. Get out of the driver's seat. Let God drive. No, please. If I had hair, I'd pull it out. No, it's my car. I have the responsibility. I know, well, typically I'll find out, or I suspect where I want to go. I don't know how to get there. Sometimes I don't know where to go, but let's assume that I have the address. I know where to go. I get in my car, I turn on the car, I put the address in the GPS, then I listen. I take directions. If I follow the directions, I will get to where I go. I'm responsible to drive the car responsibly and to listen accurately and to follow the direction. If I do that, I will get to where I'm going. GPS, and somebody in the room said, of course, we're really cute with the acronyms, God Positioning System. The whole purpose of this awakenedness, to be in the flow of reality, that emotional sobriety, is in fact to be able to listen to the tiny whispering sound that in fact is available to everybody so that we can be guided.
Well said, Herb. So let's proceed now with our overview of the 12 steps. So I think this is a very, very important idea to keep in mind, that the steps are sequentially interdependent. Now, what that means is that what happens in one step moves you in the direction of the next step. It creates a next. And it's amazing is that it follows really healthy functioning, because in life, we move from now to next. And that's exactly what happens in the steps. Step 1 moves you to step 2. What happens in step 2 will move you to step 3, and so on and so forth through all 12 steps. There is a very general and specific therapeutic value to, first of all how the steps work as a whole. They're synergistic. Any one step is powerful in itself and can create change. I use step 1 with patients all the time. As a Gestalt therapist, all of Gestalt therapy is based on the idea of paradoxical theory of change. As soon as you own what you're doing, 100%, as soon as you take 100% responsibility for what you're doing, there's a possibility of change. But if you do not own and you try to be someone you're not, you can never change. For example, until I was able to own my powerlessness over alcohol, I was unable to discover another power to deal with my alcoholism. But I had to first own that. That's why Bill says it's like the whole program of recovery is based on a bedrock of hopelessness. Now you would say, my God, hopelessness, shouldn't it be based on hope? No, because when you're hopeless, you can become hopeful. But it's not until you're hopeless can you become hopeful. So there's an incredible synergism. What we say is the sum of the parts, or each part, the sum of the parts is much greater than each part here. The whole is unbelievable, but each step in itself is incredibly powerful and therapeutic. But taken together, it creates an incredible, powerful force in your life that will, change you forever if you embrace it.
The suffering is the stimulus for the majority of human beings to change. Otherwise, there'll be no movement. Why would we? We don't have the motivation. We're quite comfortable when there's not sufficient pain. And it's about really the the bottom is, I'm tired of suffering. I cannot do this any longer. I'm tired of suffering, and I quit resisting, and I listen to direction, and I take action. That's a dynamic in itself right there that Dr. Berger was talking about. That's that willingness that is absolutely the key that unlocks the door to this awakening. Willingness in almost every step. And the dynamic I've seen, and I've talked about it with Dr. Berger, is that we're constructed as human beings with a mind that thinks and a will that makes decisions. And all of the even steps are naming steps, and all of the odd steps are decision and action steps. So what he said about the integration of this organically made tailored for us as human beings in exactly the structure, that's why there's a parallel between spirituality and psychology. It's because we're dealing with human nature.
Yes, right on. So the way I've come to describe this is that the steps are based on a charge-discharge process. Now, if you think about it, so are we. That's how we work as an organism. You develop a charge. Let's say you develop a desire. You're hungry. You have a desire to have something to drink. You're thirsty, or you want some food. You're hungry. You develop a charge for that. You now mobilize yourself. You take action to meet your need, and then you've discharged that desire. You've solved it. You've resolved it, and you're ready to move on to what's next. That is an organismic wisdom based into each human being. We self-regulate. I keep my temperature at 98.6 degrees. Sometimes I have to move more to warm myself up to get the cells moving to burn some calories. And then I'll heat myself up if I'm now hypothermic. If I'm too hot, I start to sweat. So I perspire and cool my body down through the perspiration. That happens automatically. There's a wisdom inside my body regulating it. You know how long it took Honeywell to develop those thermostats on your wall to regulate the temperature in your house? It's quite a chore to do that mechanically. You're born with that. That's the wisdom that's inherent inside of you. Well, it's not just a biological wisdom. It's a psychological wisdom. It's a spiritual wisdom if we listen to it. I don't think Bill had this in mind. I
No.
doubt very much when he was designing the steps.
Right.
As I said, that these were divinely inspired, right? He captured so many incredible pieces of wisdom, both spiritual and psychological, that he had no idea he was doing that, or else he wouldn't have been able to do it, by the way. I think. I mean, it's
Well,
like
he wasn't an educated man in the traditional sense of college. He went to law school, but he did not have a college exposure or education.
yeah, that's right. So what we're going to see is that each step will create its own unique charge. The step following it will now discharge, resolve that energy that's now generated in the step that preceded it, and then begin to create a new charge that is going to move you, get you ready. See, this is the way I like to think about it. Each step prepares you for the next one.
Well, Alan, I'm seeing it right here as you're talking. Step one is I'm suffering from ineffective power, and therefore I'm really desperate. I'm sort of exploring the sources of power.
Exactly. So then step two comes along and resolves that.
Exactly.
Says, you know what? There is something out there. You may not know about it yet because you haven't thought out enough, but it's coming. I mean, it's coming. I've been to the mountain. I've seen the truth. It's coming. Herb, you're frozen. Am I frozen? No, just Herb is frozen, huh? He's got, look at that look on his face. Huh? He's right there. Hopefully he'll join us back here in a minute. But it's so powerful what's happening.
Am I still frozen?
Frozen. Now you're unfrozen. So go back to what you were saying. I've seen it. Step one creates the suffering. Step two, that's where you're at when you got frozen.
It's gone.
You must have got an electric shock and it took your memory away from you. My God. Okay. All right. So that's what's happening here, right? Where a charge, discharge, and energy is being built up, and now it's being released in the next step. And then that step has a unique way of building up an energy and then being discharged or released in the next step.
And the total central point of step two is, Bill says, is just that willingness, the willingness, that's all, to explore the possibility.
Yes, there it is. But that's where you get hope. You see what I mean? Is the willingness, right? To consider that there's a possibility of a different way than you've been functioning, than you've been basing your whole life on. See, that's what we're being challenged with, is that the whole foundation of our life hasn't worked and that we need to deconstruct it. Now, it's quite an order. I can't go through with it. Right? You've heard that before, because that's why it happens step by step, right? You can't swallow it whole all at once. We have to take a bite at a time, chew it up, digest it, see what it means to us. That's why my sponsor, Tom, was very, very adamant about, look, the only step, and Bill echoes this in the 12 and 12, the only step that can be taken 100% is step one. It's the only one. And now I've come to believe the only part of step one that can be taken 100% is the first part. I believe that second part is something that continues to be revealed to me through my life. I mean, Herb knows recently I've gone through an evaluation for disability at the Veterans Administration. I'm a Vietnam veteran. And I've just recently come to know that I was exposed to Agent Orange, and there's what's called a presumptive diagnosis that if I have hypertension or if I'm diabetic or pre-diabetic with peripheral neuropathy and other issues, that the presumption is that those things were caused by my exposure to this defoliating agent. Well, while I got thrown in hopper to be evaluated medically for a disability, they decided to also evaluate me in terms of post-traumatic stress and for hearing loss since I was in artillery. Well, I've got severe hearing loss. So that's, yeah, Susie knows that. I say, what did you say, Susie? What did you say? That in addition to having,
That's your excuse.
that's my, no, it's actually, I have proof. It's a reality. Right? I'd like it to be an excuse because then I wouldn't be dealing with what I'm dealing with it. But that can be dealt with, right? I can get hearing aids and stuff like that. But the other thing is I went through a post-traumatic stress evaluation, and out of a scale from 1 to 8, with 1, the amount of impairment means that you are completely unable to function in your life due to post-traumatic stress. I was given a 7. A 7. Are you kidding me? Me get a 7? Yeah, I got a 7 because of the impact it's had on my ability to form and sustain close, intimate relationships. It's like I can't trust anyone. I can't let somebody get close to me. I mean, Herb and I have been friends for a long time. It's only been in the last, 5 years that we've gotten real closer. I've kept you at an arm's distance as I've kept most of the people in my life at an arm's distance. That's starting to change, but I was totally unaware of that. That's the second half, right, of that first step, the unmanageability of my life. It takes time to become aware of the forces that are living us. And that's what Bill meant by more will be revealed. You want to add to that at all, Herb, or?
Just that these we use a lot of terms, and I want to just make sure that we're aware of the broad perspective that we're using here. We're talking about emotional sobriety. We're talking about steps. We're talking about principles. And those are all really synonyms for one another. And the principles are absolute. I mean, there's relative principles that culture and society create, and it's an agreement on a community basis, and those will differ based on history and geography. But what doesn't change, for instance, a principle is the law of gravity. In the Earth's atmosphere, outside the Earth atmosphere, of course, it changes, but within the Earth atmosphere, gravity is all the same. All right, it's absolutely the same. It's a law of physics. It's a principle of physics. It's a principle of reality. Well, there are human, universal, spiritual, those are all synonyms, principles that operate in terms of the human functionality. And sometimes we call them values, and sometimes we call them steps, and sometimes Bill calls them principles as a synonym. That's what we're talking about. And just its application and practical use in emotional sobriety is that the principles are guidelines and guardrails for us. Guidelines and guardrails. If we transgress principles, that is the source of our suffering, and eventually that transgression and the principles will crush us. So the total point of awakening and the journey of the 12 steps and good therapy and emotional sobriety is to be in alignment with the principles, practice these principles, to be in alignment with the flow of reality on a daily basis as it unpacks, as it manifests, as evolution happens a second at a time.
Yeah, that's very well said. Very well said. All right, so charge, discharge, right? You've got that, right? That's the process that's going through the whole steps. Step 1 is the only step that is charge oriented. It's developing a charge, right? It's not resolving anything. It's creating a tension. One of the ways that we can think about our lives is, how do you deal with tension in your life? What do you do with it? Well, actually, this 12 steps are showing us through a process that tension is not a problem. It's important because of where it can lead us if we follow it and we don't avoid it and we don't alienate ourselves from it. So step 1 is the only step that is charge oriented. Every other step involves both a charge and a discharge component to it. So example, step 2 resolves the charge created in step 1. I call that, you'll hear me talk about it when I present my information on step 1, it creates an existential crisis. What I've been doing doesn't work. I've made a mess of things. I'm now, experiencing incomprehensible demoralization, the suffering Herb talked about, but I have no idea what to do about it. Right? That's the existential crisis. What I'm doing doesn't work, and I have nothing better to replace it. That comes along. Step 3 now carries a message of hope. But as you can see, while that resolves the crisis, there is hope. But it can't just be an idea. Hope has to be grounded in action, or it's fantasy. Too much of the time we feed ourselves hope based on fantasy and get disappointed, but that's because it's not grounded in reality. It's not grounded in action. So step 3 now also builds up a charge because it says hope without action is just a fantasy. We need to mobilize our resources to take action to make hope our reality. So now the charge is, I want my life to be different. I want my life. What do I do? Moves us to step 3. That's what comes next. And we'll get into that more and more. Any comment you want to make on that, Herb?
I do. Bill is very precise with his wording, and I'll get more deep into that as we go along with each of the steps. But just as a highlight, Bill uses the word choice in step 2. Step 1, no choice. That's what powerless means. If you want to really have a new experience with the word powerless, because we use it all the time, we become brain dead to it, use the word no choice. I have no choice with regard to my addiction. That's why I need help. But I also have no choice with regard to managing my life on my own power. Powerless. All right. No choice. So in step 2, he uses the word choice. He doesn't use the word decision. He uses the word choice. All right. That's the first indication of hope. I'm expecting and I'm hoping, and it's about faith because I really don't know the truth of it. All right. And then when we come to step 3, if help is available, step 2, then I need to have a relationship with the source of help. And that's the decision. He uses the term decision, made a decision to turn, to have a relationship with that concept that we had hope and faith in step 2. So that's the integration and the sort of the organic nature that Dr. Berger was talking about. I make a choice. There's no evidence that it's real. In step 2, I make a decision. In step 3, the implication of the decision is that it's connected to a commitment to action. There's no action except the prayer, but it's a commitment to action.
Charge, discharge, charge, discharge.
Yeah.
On and on and on. A buildup of energy and then a release of the energy. That's what we're doing here.
And the context of emotional sobriety is so brilliant here because it is about feelings. Human beings are feeling beings, not just feeling, because we have a brain and we have free will, but when this is a total respect for, honoring of, and giving dignity to those feelings, like the yellow light on the dashboard, the signal to us of joy, the signal to us of suffering, and navigating that balance between joy and suffering.
Right on. So one way of looking at it is the steps, as I mentioned before, are incredibly grounded in very solid psychological principles, but they're also grounded in behaviorism. They're grounded in humanistic psychology and in solid spiritual wisdom. I mean, it's an amazing program that integrates so many disciplines. You know, there was this book. I'm blocking the author's name. It may come to me as we go on. He was from Utah, and a brilliant psychologist. And he says, you know, one of the unfortunate things that have happened in psychology, out of this desire, this need to be seen as a science, is that we totally disavowed and disconnected ourselves from philosophy, from theology, from spirituality. And it all became focused on an evidence-based practice, right? Well, where was God in an evidence-based practice? Where do you put God in that, right? You don't. I mean, it's what happened. It's got to be a science based on empiricism. We do this, we observe it, and then we see how it works, right? It's that basic thing. That's what we're going to base psychology on. Well, we went so far the other way, I think we lost the soul in psychology.
It's a great term, psyche.
Yes, we did. It's like we got disconnected from it. So now you've got this sterilized approach, and now you come up with these canned programs to change people and these protocols, right? Well, good news is as life is, it swings to one side of the issue, and then it swings back to the other side. It swung way far over in that side, in that objective side, and it's coming back to the other way. And instead of basing psychology on evidence-based practice, you know what the new term is, Herb?
No.
Practice-based evidence.
Oh, wow. Oh, I love it. Yeah.
Practice-based evidence. So now we go into, and I say, if you want to know if AA works, go to a meeting.
Or take a look at the history of AA.
Well, look at the history of it, but go to a meeting. See go to that meeting for a year. Watch what happens in people's lives. That's practice-based evidence. Is what is happening right now in that room with you. People are changing. People's lives are changing. Now, that doesn't happen magically. Even though there is a certain magic to it all, you've got to work the steps if you want the profound change that's possible. But it's very exciting for me to be looking at it this way as a trained clinical psychologist now, and as a psychotherapist, and as a member of the program. I feel so blessed that we have this gift.
Fred Luskin made a comment about that. He keeps his secular science really separate from any type of spirituality, but we've been doing work together on the forgiveness process. And I said, you know, Fred, the words are different, the vocabulary is different, but the dynamics the same in terms of 12-step and spirituality as well, in contrast to or in parallel to the psychological process that you've outlined in your book, Forgive for Good. And he says, but you spiritual 12-step people have a real advantage. And I said, what's that? He said, you got God. He said, I can't use it, but you got God. It's an X plus factor that really puts some power into the process.
Right on.
That's cool.
Right.
Huh?
That is very cool. From my point of view, one of the things the steps are doing is they help us recover and integrate our lost true self. The way I've been describing it lately is our lost authenticity. That we've lost our authenticity, which is our true self, is that we've never thought that who we are is good enough, that we had to be someone other than we are to be okay, to belong, to fit in, to be loved, to be accepted. And now what we start to do is unravel all of that. And I liked how Herb and I have described this process as a rite of passage.
Oh, Bill Wilson did too, by the way, in step 6.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah.
What did he say?
Well, he doesn't use the term, but he says in step 6 in the 12 and 12, this is the process that brings the boys to become men.
There it is. That's one rite of passage, right? The rite of passage of helping a boy become a man in a civilization. And any rite of passage is about transformation. It's about making a transition from one place in your life, right? For us, those that are suffering from, let's say, alcoholism or other drug addictions, suffering from our addiction to now recovery, to experiencing ourselves in recovery and being a member of the recovery community. That's the rite of passage that's taking place. We can also say it takes us from someone completely alienated with ourselves and in disharmony, in conflicted, torn to pieces hood is the way some psychologists have described it. From a torn to pieces hood existence to an existence that is where you're integrated.
This
We're
only
not. Yeah, go ahead, Herb.
This only happens, though, if you do the steps and apply them to your personal life, that you have the transformation. Some of the problem with traditional AA is put the plug in the jug and go to meetings, and meeting makers make it. And I understand the spirit and intention of it, but if that's the only thing that people do, their soul dries up. And after 5 years of abstinence or 10 years of abstinence, they have no spirit. They have no awakenedness. They're just robots doing the ritual.
Yeah. This is what Karen Horney says. She goes, the therapeutic value in a disillusioning process, we become disillusioned with the old ideas. That's what she's referring to here, with the false self, right? With the self that we tried to become, lies that in the possibility that with the weakening of the obstructive forces of being the forces tied to the ego, right? The constructive forces of the real self have a chance to grow. This is what happens. This is the general therapeutic effect of the 12 steps. And as we're seeing is that what emotional sobriety is helping us be grounded in our authenticity, which creates an unshakable life. That we're no longer concerned with how other people define us. We're concerned with our opinion of ourselves. You see that it establishes a true self-esteem. That's what self-esteem is. It's my evaluation of myself. It's not your evaluation of me. That's other validated self-esteem. That's false self-esteem. My self-esteem is based on you giving me pats on the back. Then I'm in trouble.
Or living up to some culturally or family imposed criteria of what success looks like, or what advertising tells us success looks like. It's not just our coming to grips with our esteem of ourselves, but it's a healthy esteem that comes organically from the inside and is kind of neutralized in terms of the impact of the energy from outside of us.
That's right. That's right. So I just said that the steps help us develop an authentic self-esteem. Steps help us develop a higher and more mature consciousness, a more differentiated consciousness. So as we progress through the 12 steps, we become more and more differentiated. So let's talk about differentiation real quickly. The analogy to biology, I think, helps us get some sense of what this means psychologically. So cells, this is the first under use of the term differentiation, was in cell biology. So when a cell starts out, when a cell is conceived, it's undifferentiated, meaning that it has a DNA in it that has not yet expressed itself. When the DNA expresses itself, what it does is it turns on certain genes and turns off other genes. When it does that, the cell starts to now define itself and its function. And the cell says, I'm going to become an eye now. And it starts to grow itself into that organ or a liver or whatever its DNA has been programmed to do. Now, the orchestration of this is unbelievable. Thinking about all these cells with all these different programs, right? It's remarkable in terms of what happens in the body. Now, if a cell grows into what it can be, if that cell was programmed to become an eye, it'll mature and become an eye. And the other cells around it that are eyelids and other things like that, nose, are not going to influence it. Its function will remain what it is unless it's intruded upon by other cells, which as it becomes more and more differentiated, it's not, unless we become sick and ill. Now, if that cell is taken too early in its development and placed in another part of the body, so if it's growing into an eye and I move it over here to the cheek, when it has not expressed its DNA yet, it does a remarkable thing. It changes its basic nature to go along with the cells surrounding it in the microenvironment. It now reprograms its DNA and it becomes a part of the cheek. That's why there's so much interest in stem cells. They're undifferentiated cells. They don't have any DNA programming. So theoretically, if I put that cell and you are short on cartilage in your knee, and I put it next to the cartilage, it will take all the programming and start to grow itself into the cartilage that you need. Now, Bowen said, my God, maybe this is true for people. Is that you have a certain potential to be a unique individual. And if you are encouraged to go along those lines, and this is the difference between biology and psychology. Psychology, we're so much more dependent in our early years of life on the environment we're in to grow us appropriately. If we're encouraged to grow along those lines, then we will grow into what we can be. Very few, if anyone, gets that kind of a message. And it's unfortunate. It's not just the dysfunction in our families, although that's a major influence on us. It's also the dysfunction in our culture, in our societies, the messages we get about what it means to be a man or a woman, the messages we get in our culture about, especially here in the United States. You know, I was just talking to a guy today. He was so into his image. And he says, you know, I had him talked about, you know, I really struggle with my insecurity. And if you guys know me already, I don't like to think of us as a singularity. I think of us as having self parts. I says, well, what part of you is insecure? Let me talk to that part of you. And the first thing out of his mouth, I said, so tell me, what makes you insecure? He says, I drive a Prius. Nobody's going to think I'm successful. I mean, hear that, folks. I drive a Prius. I said, so for you, the Prius has a billboard on the top of it that says, I'm an unsuccessful man driving. So I just wanted you to know that that's who I am, who's driving this car. Now, is that the only possibility? Somebody might think of him as a very smart guy. You're getting 90 miles a gallon or whatever you're getting in a Prius. You know, you might be a very ecologically minded guy. You could be a very thoughtful guy, but not in his mind. See, in his mind, he's focusing on one dimension. You know who else does that? Children in the pre-operational thought. In that stage of development, if you give a child a task, they can only focus on one dimension of that task. Well, that's what he's doing. You guys remember the story of the cookies? You know, so let's say if I'm sitting there with a child and I say, we're gonna share these cookies right now. Or let's say we're graham crackers because they're split in half, right? And I've got 3 graham crackers that are divided in half. And I say, all right, we're gonna share these. I give the child 1 and I keep 2. And I say to that child between the ages of 2 and 7, I say to that child, was that fair way of sharing? Child will say no. Say, what How come it's not fair? What's wrong? She goes, you have 2, I have 1. I say, okay, let me see if I can make it fair. I reach over now and I break that child's graham cracker into 2. And I say, now, is this fair? And you know what the child says? Yes, it's fair. I say, why is it now fair? Because I have 2 and you have 2. What's missing? The child is not accounting, right? The volume of the cookie, they're just looking at the number, not the quality. It's quantitative, not qualitative, is their consciousness. That's the kind of consciousness that we bring to life emotionally on a lot of different things. That's where we start at in the program. We have a very immature level of consciousness. And through the grinding process of the steps, and I do think of it as grinding, if you do the steps, if you go to Herb's workshop, it's not for the faint of heart. You're going to work. You're going to be working every week. You're going to have a notebook by the end of this stuff filled with your writing, right? You're going to be grinding is the way I describe the process. And he's got the 12-step boot camp is that I call it. Or you want to go to the 12-step boot camp? Go see the monk, Herb. I mean, that's what it is for him. And they grind. And that grinding is what raises our consciousness. Would you like to comment on that process?
Yeah, I would, and to give it just a simple, very visual, very visceral picture, and that is we're going from the darkness to the light.
Yeah.
And Bill says it on page 14 of his own story. Make a note, check it out. It's a great phrase. It summarizes the journey. I mean, it absolutely summarizes the journey. Simple, but not easy. A price has to be paid. It means the destruction of self-centeredness. I must turn in all things to the light that presides over us all. It's the deconstruction that Alan was talking about. That deconstruction of the false self that we don't know is a false self. And that's the grinding, that deconstruction. And then the reconstruction is the reframing. That's some more grinding.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and you also give the analogy of the lens being grounded.
Yes.
Right? It's the same thing. As we come in, we have a lens on that we're wearing, that we're not even aware that we have this lens on. It's the way we see the world. The way that child sees the world, that's the reality to that child. Now you'd say, well, that's not reality. Well, it is that child's reality. That child can't see another reality because their brain hasn't matured, right? It hasn't evolved to where it can see things differently. And you got to understand that reality to that child is the very different reality than the reality you and I experience. But
and you and I are only experiencing the reality that we see through the lenses through which we're looking. And many of us who have not done either good therapy or good 12-step work are looking through lenses that are delusional, they're warped, and therefore we don't know that we're looking at reality as we are, not how reality is.
Right. and that's so all of this that Herb and I are saying may be totally distorted and not true. And may have just joined Herb and I on our acid trip. No, not true. Susie's going, oh my God, these guys. Stop it.
But Tuxie has a book that was published transcribing a retreat that he did, and he calls it A New Pair of Glasses. This 100% my experience, Alan's experience, that we didn't see that we couldn't see until we began to see that we couldn't see, and then we began to see.
I love the little emoji that Derek just put up. Thanks, Derek. That was funny. That was great. Good, wonderful. Okay, well, just a couple more, and then we'll open this up for some questions. So this is Eric Fromm, one of my favorite writers, brilliant psychoanalyst, sociologist, and just brilliant
Well,
thoughts. And he says,
philosopher and spiritual, really
there you go.
theologian. He really was. Yeah.
That's right. He embraced all discipline.
Yeah.
He goes, the aim of life is to live it intensely, right? To be alive. You've heard me say this before. When people come to me and say, well, can you help me become happy? I say, I'm not interested. I'm interested in helping you become alive. And if you're alive, you'll be happy sometimes. You'll also be sad when it's appropriate. What I want to do is try to help you enjoy life as it is. And when it's appropriate, enjoy the happiness. And when it's appropriate for you to cry and grieve if you're experiencing a loss. So he goes, the aim of life is to live it intensely, to be fully born. Listen to that. To be fully born, to allow ourselves to mature, to be fully awake, to emerge from the ideas of infantile grandiosity. It's all about me, folks. That's the infantile grandiosity. Harry Tiebout, the first psychiatrist that befriended AA, says, I'm beginning to see that the real dilemma for those people in recovery is that their infantile ideas have persisted into adulthood. In other words, he called us big babies. I mean, yes, we are. That to emerge from the ideas of infantile grandiosity into the conviction of one's real strength, to find a new power upon which to base our life. Love that quote. It's a great quote. Really captures it, doesn't it, Herb?
Well, and Bill, in A Spiritual Awakening in Appendix 2, he has this wonderful line, unsuspected inner resource.
There you go. That's it. Except for step one, and I would just say the first half of step one. All the remaining steps state a perfect ideal, meaning we shall never work them perfectly. That means we must be content with progress. And that's the part of this thing is this, Nike had it wrong, or Mikey had it right, I should say, when he said, just try, right? And then a lot of people would come along and say, well, Nike had it wrong. It's not just try, do it. All right. Oh, that's what Nike said, right? Do it, right? Don't just try, do it. They had it wrong. It's really just try. Give it your best effort.
And please, whatever you do is good enough for right now.
Right.
Please wear this robe gently, lean into it gently, wear it loosely. The perfectionists, I know you're out there, half of the group listening is inclined toward whether you know it or not being perfectionist. No. Progress, right? Practice makes progress, not perfect.
Yeah.
And it's something I'm from my heart. I invite people to embrace is whatever you do, know that it's not good enough, and that it's good enough for right now. You'll do better. My total experience with step one, I even disagree with the phrase about doing step one perfectly. We do it the best we can, and of course it's measurable, drink or not drink is pretty black and white there, but in process addiction, it's not that black and white. And even there, as an alcoholic, I did not understand the full implications and experience the full implications for 10 years. And I could give you the progression, drama first, allergy second, obsession third, unmanageability fourth. It took 3 journeys through the steps with 3 different men over a 10-year period. And that's the journey I'm going to take you on next month.
So this is some of Herb's writing and resources. This is the book that he's published, or that Hazelton published, Practice the Here and Now. Outstanding. His other books are outstanding. If you haven't connected to Herb's website, it's filled with archives and resources and video and audio programs. Please do that. This is my latest book. We have a 12-step study area It meets 4 times a month on Thursday nights before the emotional sobriety workshop. It's a very, very nominal fee of $12.99 a month. It just covers the administration of that site. Nobody that's on that site is making any money. It's covering administration for it. Herb volunteers his time. I volunteer my time. It's a wonderful resource. Tom Potash comes in. Kristen comes in. It's a great place. Please come in and support it. There's a lot of my DVDs that Herb and I have done together, audio programs that we've done together, and a lot of work that I've done separately from Herb. That's all accessible to you on this emotional sobriety study area. So please tap into that. If you go to 4dphd.com, you can see how to set up an account if you so desire.